After finishing work, Henry looked for Akatsuki to relax. Akatsuki couldn't escape because this was the guild area, and she didn't know the paths or restrictions set there. She was forced to wear cute clothes and stand in front of everyone, feeling very embarrassed. Marie didn't know where the green-haired young man was, but Sugu said he hadn't returned yet. Just then, he brought a boar boss back to the guild. He then collapsed from exhaustion and fell asleep. Nyanto was very disappointed when he had to inform them that the giant boar meat couldn't be cooked because it smelled too pungent. Shiro then told Minori that all preparations were complete, so she had to hold on a little longer. Shiro then went with Nyanto to look at some houses in the city that could now be bought, but the prices were very high. They then met an old friend named Sejiro, who had formed his guild to be with people after the great disaster. He thought Shiro hated him because he had invited him in the guild, but he refused. He explained his reasons and how his views had changed. Now he needed Sejiro's help. Sejiro admitted that this city now felt like an invisible prison. Hearing that Shiro had a way to deal with it, Sejiro agreed because he didn't want to waste Shiro's precious time. He knew Shiro always had great plans he didn't understand, so there was no need for further explanation. Sejiro's first task was to help sell food because he was also attractive to the girls. Shiro felt it was now time to move on to the second step of the plan. The next day, Marie and Henry met a young man named Jason, who had previously played with Marie, but since they each had their guild, they rarely met. Jason had a guild that also functioned as a trade guild with 700 members. Marie needed help buying food supplies. Jason knew this, so he tried to pressure the price. Marie had been told by Shiro that if she encountered difficulty, just smile and let Henry handle the rest. Henry noticed that Marie was almost exhausted, so he gave Jason a price and said if he needed time to think, go ahead because they would meet 2 more trade guilds for the upcoming plan. Jason wanted more information about this business, so he agreed to the price given by Marie's guild for the supplies. Meanwhile, Minori was still being treated unfairly. Seeing this world as a bad place on the day of the great disaster, she didn't know what to do besides sit and cry, waiting for someone to come and save her. However, her brother, Gia, accepted the reality. Gia became her support because the boy seemed very happy experiencing new things. They received experience bottles every day, which made Gia want to try fighting monsters, and Minji also became braver thanks to her brother. But they were soon attacked by other players and lost everything. That's when they both remembered that important items should be stored in the bank, as Shiro had taught them. When they needed a place to take shelter, they both encountered the name of this extortionist guild. Minji felt jealous of Shiro because he could take over the world for himself, while Minji could only cry because of her helplessness. Therefore, Minji felt she was not worthy of being saved by Shiro. Meanwhile, Marie and Henry had now added 2 more trade guild owners. One owner was somewhat insensitive, while the other had a brain like Shiro but wasn't as smart. Shiro informed them that they shouldn't share cooking recipes before reaching an agreement, but they still had the upper hand because cooking recipes were tempting bait that everyone wanted. They had the right to disclose or keep information secret but shouldn't lie. Henry informed them that his guild was planning a major move that required their help, and the leader of the operation was Shiro. Hearing Shiro's name, everyone knew how great he was, making Henry's words carry more weight, and their requirement was 5 million gold coins. Everyone thought 5 million was the cost needed for a high-level mission from this expansion. Marie gave them a taste of pudding made from high-level monster ingredients, so they knew that to make delicious food, high-quality ingredients were needed, and the profits would not be small. After deducting costs, she needed another 45 million gold coins. If only one guild provided it, the balance of power would be too tilted to one side, so she asked to meet all 3 to divide each guild contributing 1 million gold coins. But the insensitive uncle was willing to pay it all to get the biggest profit, making the other 2 parties have to contribute as well. Meanwhile, the twin siblings knew they would be saved by Shiro, but Minji felt too pathetic and unworthy of being helped by Shiro. Gia, on the other hand, felt Shiro was too great, so he wanted to be like Shiro rather than continue relying on him. Their 2 sisters had returned and were very tired. Shiro's team brought food for them and informed them that Shiro had prepared the next step. Marie's and Shiro's guilds then sent invitations to major guilds across the country to attend a meeting. If only Marie invited them, they might not have cared, but because it was Shiro, they postponed their work to come. Shiro then called the twin siblings to inform them of the next plan. Minji decided to change for her brother and follow Shiro. The meeting was about to officially begin. In the game, guilds were usually divided into 2 types: guilds that focused on combat, mostly filled with high-level players, and guilds that focused on trade and support, which were more numerous. This meeting gathered all the leaders of the major guilds. Shiro started the meeting, and everyone still remembered him. Shiro revealed that the plan to connect small guilds had almost failed because everyone only cared about personal gain. So, everyone thought this meeting was the same as before, but Shiro immediately said that this was to improve the situation in this big city. However, one combat guild withdrew because they were only focused on fighting monsters and occasionally returning here to sell goods, so they didn't care about this situation. Shiro had anticipated the withdrawal of this combat guild from the meeting. Sira asked about Akatsuki and Sugu. Shiro had given them another task. The children who were being extorted for experience points every day should escape when they had the chance. Outside the guild hall door, Akatsuki would be there to welcome them. If they encountered trouble and died, Sugu would be waiting at the temple to await their resurrection and escort them away. So, their basic task was simply to run out. Back to Shiro, he mentioned that currently there were only 11 guilds at the round table, and he wanted to invite them to the round table guild. The 4 strongest combat guilds were chosen, 3 trading guilds were selected because of their strength, and the rest represented other players and smaller guilds. Shiro was only proposing and organizing this meeting because his guild only had 4 members, so it wasn't enough to be a member. Now, onto the main issue. Shiro had a way to improve security in this city. He immediately discussed the recent extortion of experience points by some guilds. Perhaps it didn't break the game rules, but essentially this game had no rules. The ban on fighting in the city was only due to the fear of guards coming to intervene, so it was just a game mechanic, not a rule. Rules are something made by humans and acknowledged by others. Shiro gave an example of the city where they rescued Sira as an example of disorder there. Shiro's words made everyone start to waver, but it was still not enough to reach an agreement. However, they all acknowledged that even if Shiro set the rules, if someone didn't recognize them, what would happen? What if their large combat guilds didn't accept the rules? Shiro decided to take preventive measures. He bought this guild headquarters building, so now Shiro controlled access. If they wanted to return to the guild headquarters, they had to pass through this place. The guild bank was also here, so this place was very important. Shiro had the right to prevent anyone in this city from accessing their bank accounts. Therefore, people called Shiro a demon. The nickname Dark Glasses was very fitting for Shiro. 2 twin siblings started fighting the extortionists to escape from the guild. They met Akatsuki's group outside, who informed Shiro that the plan had begun. Others saw Shiro threatening them, but rules were made to enforce discipline. Where did he get this place? From the 5 million gold coins provided by 3 trading guilds. They also got a cake recipe in return. Initially, they didn't intend to fight Shiro. At that time, the remaining twin had not yet exited the door and was intercepted by the extortionists. They used magic that drastically reduced the twins' blood. Ninji created a shield, but it didn't last long. Jia pulled his sister to run quickly outside. Inside, the door could no longer be opened because Shiro had blacklisted them. The guild leader managed to get out and capture him. Although he couldn't use magic, he could use his strength to finish off Jia. At that moment, Akatsuki came and informed Shiro that there was one person left out, so Shiro blacklisted him. He was then kicked out of the guild headquarters and captured by Sugu outside. Akatsuki then took the 2 twins to a safe place to clean up. Shiro now had a voice in front of the council, and he set 2 criteria to change this city. Hearing that the escape was complete, he smiled. But a red-haired youth from the combat guild angrily demanded that Shiro reveal his guild's plans. A week after the meeting, the entire city had almost transformed and was more vibrant than before. Back at the meeting, Shiro and Marie announced that the way to cook delicious food was to have someone with the skill of a chef cook it directly. At this time, the trade associations have joined forces to create steam engine technology that had never existed in the game before. This means they can now race to invent new things with their own hands instead of using outdated commands as before. Shiro's initiative will give players motivation and goals to strive for, as most players now feel bored due to a lack of activities. Encouraging development will give people a purpose to earn money and enjoy life. Not only will the trade associations benefit, but making money by killing monsters will also be increasingly promoted and advantageous for associations that focus more on combat. Regarding the law, Shiro wants to establish a ban on hitting or bullying low-level players in the hunting areas around the city. Concerning human rights, he wants to allow players the freedom to join or leave any guild they want, as well as establish a ban on detention or oppression that also applies to NPCs. Since NPCs are now similar to real humans, they are also directly involved in players' lives and are native inhabitants of this world. If they continue to oppress NPCs, there will surely come a time when NPCs rise against the players. The trade associations have simultaneously joined the Roundtable Association after that day. The guild leaders announced the contents of the meeting and the cooking formula. Whenever someone wants to enter the guild hall, they have to pay 1 gold coin as tax. The group that had detained and robbed low-level players had been imprisoned in the guild hall for a long time, so they escaped using teleportation commands or stabbing each other to reincarnate at the temple. They disbanded the guild and left the city. The rescued children joined Marie's guild, so she had to move to a larger place. Shiro's group moved to a new house, and Gassen came to tell Shiro that he would hire NPCs to work. However, at this time, he and another guild leader realized that NPCs had recently become aware and cautious of them, indicating that NPCs had begun to take actions that needed to be watched. Marie and Henry then brought gifts to celebrate Shiro's new house. Sojo and an old team member, Nazuna, also came to congratulate them. This place had been renovated by the insensitive older brother from the large guild, and previously, the leader of the Black Sword Guild had also come to clean this place. After the guests left, Shiro asked about the twins' condition. Marie only said they were fine and then left. Nyan went out to buy groceries to make curry. Shiro's group was very excited about the curry. Shiro felt grateful to see his two friends who had been with him from the start. Nyan returned with the twins who expressed their desire to join Shiro's guild. While Shiro was still confused, Nyan reminded him that he was a leader, so he decided to accept the twins into the guild. All the guild members then sat under the stars to eat curry and enjoy the fruits of their labor, making Shiro's emotions swell. In the NPC Kingdom, also known in the story as the People of the Land, the king heard news that adventurers and players had formed a roundtable conference, so he took note of this. Meanwhile, there were two people of the land who were hunting. They did not trust the adventurers because they believed the adventurers only knew how to kill without purpose. As they were about to shoot a deer, they saw black clouds approaching, signaling impending danger. In the city, development was evident, with everyone finding ways to trade and grow their businesses. Sugu and Akatsuki were busy training the twins, while Shiro tried to use his power to develop contracts or similar things. Nyan asked Shiro to take a break and go on vacation. Suddenly, Henry called Shiro for help with some issues. It turned out Marie was on strike because she wanted to go play and not keep working. Seeing Marie continuously sulking, Shiro got the idea to hold a training trip for players under level 40. This way, they could have fun while still considering it as work. After a discussion, they decided to go. Nyan, of course, joined as a coach. That night, the twins were determined to change and become stronger to prove that Shiro was not wrong in deciding to save them. Although it was called training, Marie and Henry were very enthusiastic about preparing for the trip. Suddenly, they heard news that a group of people was heading to the city. When they went out to meet them, this group introduced themselves as envoys from the Free Cities Alliance located east of the continent. It seemed they had started approaching the Round Table Conference and inviting the entire conference to participate in a meeting of rulers next month. Shiro knew this had both advantages and disadvantages. The advantage was that they would gain more information and knowledge about the people of the land in this world, but the disadvantage was that they might get caught in the political games of the rulers. However, Shiro was not too worried about the disadvantages because the people of the land were weaker than the players, so they would still hold control. The next day, Marie's group set out for training. On the journey, they enjoyed sights they had never seen before. They decided to rest at an abandoned school and that night held a BBQ party. Unfortunately, Shiro could not join because he had to attend a prior meeting where the conference members elected one person from the Fighter Guild and one from the Merchant Guild to attend the meeting. However, they still needed someone strong in politics and negotiations. All eyes turned in one direction, so Shiro could not avoid it. He went along with his brother, who wore black armor and was insensitive from the Merchant Guild. Akatsuki always followed Shiro, and Henry also joined. Although Henry claimed to join to learn, Shiro knew she followed because of Akatsuki. Shiro knew that the people of the land would undergo significant changes. Previously, when the people of the land were just programmed characters, they could complete missions for them and receive valuable rewards such as magic bags. However, now, with the game's changes, new players who did not yet have magic bags would never have them. After strolling around the city, Marie's group finally reached the beach they had been eagerly waiting for. They immediately ran into the sea to soak. Meanwhile, Shiro's group arrived at the Ice Palace, said to have been built by an ancient race. That night, a dance party and meeting were held. Everyone felt quite tense. Akatsuki felt uncomfortable in party clothes, but Henry kept praising her. The reason was the clothes could not hide weapons. The Alliance leader approached them, and the brother in black armor introduced himself as Krusty. He had a noble aura, making Shiro feel a bit more at ease. While Krusty discussed with the king, Shiro and Henry realized that the nobles were reluctant to approach them because neither side had information about the other. Both sides wanted to obtain information from the other but did not want to provide information about themselves. The king then introduced his niece to everyone. She was Lessa. On Marie's side, Sugu announced that the next day they would enter a dungeon for an exam. Everyone was excited until they heard that only they would enter without a coach, which made their faces change. Meanwhile, Shiro's group observed the nobles who were dancing. The king wanted them to dance one song because everyone was watching them. If they did not dance, it would embarrass the Round Table Conference, but if they danced, they would embarrass themselves. Krusty wanted to discuss some matters with the king, so Shiro had to dance. Fortunately, Henry joined as a dance partner. Henry knew Shiro could not dance, so she guided him. Henry, with her character class as a supporter with a voice, only needed to give a rhythm for Shiro to follow. They managed to draw all the attention on the dance floor. The children accidentally bumped into Akatsuki, thinking she was a child too, and invited her to play hide and seek, causing her to disappear and leave only her clothes behind. After that, Shiro could rest, and Minori called him. Minori was worried about the journey to the dungeon the next day because she feared being a burden to everyone. However, the next morning, Shiro's group was enjoying breakfast, and Shiro vowed to take revenge on those who had pushed him to dance. Akatsuki thought Shiro was being childish, but Shiro realized that Akatsuki seemed angry, so he shifted his attention back to the main issue. Shiro wanted to know if this group had a chef because it seemed that this castle would need more help, as he believed that the noble training would still continue with the entire Land Alliance, which amounted to about 30,000 people. And with 20,000 of their players on the same side, the land would surely be worried about them. The purpose of this meeting was to see if the players had any specific ambitions and plans, but the dance party last night had wiped those thoughts from their minds. Shiro dared to swear that the people of the Great Land were thinking like this. Before the Great Disaster, they only needed to pay the players, and the players would not disturb them. But since that day, the number of players running missions has decreased, and now they are forming ruling organizations like they did and developing very quickly, so they must immediately bring the roundtable conference to their side. Clearly, they would not want to be their subordinates, so they would try to negotiate and bribe individuals or small guilds from the players' side. How to prevent this from happening and ensure Shiro's thoughts are correct? Akatsuki is the person Shiro needs to scout. At that time, the group that was training had arrived at the dungeon, and Nyan showed the way to the beginner dungeon and told them to know their limits before entering the intermediate path. After dividing the team, the two twin brothers went with the little girl Sira, another girl named Isuzu, and a delusional young man named Judy. This young man had a low level but often boasted and somehow still managed to be friends with Tojiya. Minori wanted to plan but couldn't get into the conversation, feeling increasingly insecure. Before entering, Nyan and Sugu gave advice and encouragement to them. After entering, Rudy was asked to use magic to create light so they could see the way in this dark cave. Sira also managed to do it, making the young man feel that his light was weaker, but since the brighter the better, he ignored it. They then arrived at a crossroads, with the previous group having entered the intermediate path, so they took the other path. Minori wanted to make sure the path was correct because she was a magician, but she thought the closer her position, the faster her magic would fly. So, Minji could only comfort herself by helping in time. The whole group then encountered 3 skeletons. Tojiya attacked first to attract the monster's attention, but the excessive attack injured him, so Minori had to heal just as the monster attacked. Sira used healing magic again, and Rudy used magic to deal with the rest. Isuzu strengthened Rudy to shoot magic again, making them work quite well together. Suddenly, Rudy managed to dodge an arrow shot by one of the skeleton archers. Tojiya, who was too excited, attacked and got caught by 5 skeletons that suddenly appeared. Minori wanted to use protective magic but was not fast enough. Suddenly, the skeletons switched to attacking Judy, quickly depleting his blood. They had no choice but to flee. Meanwhile, Krusty was discussing with an official when he saw Princess Lessa, so he postponed his work to meet the princess. That night, Krusty told Shiro's group that he no longer had to worry about being invited to the troublesome noble parties because he had a strong shield. Shiro didn't understand what he meant by that shield. The princess told her servant about Krusty. When Krusty met the princess, she found Krusty quite troublesome, but it was as if Krusty could read her mind. Krusty said that he didn't like noble tea parties, so he chose to get acquainted with the princess as an excuse to avoid the parties. Her servant suggested the princess not get too close to Krusty because he was an adventurer, and they had no information about them. The next morning, the princess saw Krusty helping the soldiers train. He explained that he wanted to understand the people of the Great Land better, but the princess knew he was investigating their strength. Krusty deliberately spoke loudly so that the soldiers gathered and proposed a match, with the strongest winner accompanying the princess. Everyone was excited to hear that. Shiro, who was passing by, finally understood what Krusty's shield meant. Akatsuki, while investigating the nobles, was hindered by children who found her, forcing her to hide again. Shiro also faced difficulties in his private conference because everyone had high egos and didn't want to listen to each other's opinions. Minori called for further advice, but he was very busy. Krusty had defeated all the soldiers, and the princess was not surprised at all. Krusty then went with the princess, lay on a chair to rest, and suggested the princess try sitting relaxed. He told the princess that adventurers were completely free, and to achieve that freedom, they had to have determination. The group of children practiced repeatedly but still lost, even though the monsters they fought were of lower levels. Rudy blamed everyone in the back line. Minji wanted to speak, but couldn't get into the conversation. The trainers outside were not worried the children would have problems because if they died, they would be resurrected in the city. Sugu would drive to pick them up and bring crabs, but Nyan only liked small crabs because large crabs tasted bland. Suddenly, Marie saw waves in the distance that quickly disappeared. At that time, the insensitive brother was negotiating with a noble. They appreciated the adventurer's efforts to find ways to cook food that made the region richer, but there were problems in delivery because of monsters. They needed the adventurers to eradicate the monsters, but they needed sea shipping technology. Krusty and the princess attended a social event. Krusty only talked with the princess. Suddenly, two girls approached them and wanted to speak to Krusty. He took the two girls and the princess outside. The two girls praised Krusty, but he only downplayed it. The princess felt annoyed but agreed to let the two girls go quickly. After they left, Krusty told the princess that he approached her because he had a younger sister who resembled the princess, so he wanted to be with the princess to reduce his fatigue. The princess accepted the reason and offered her hand to Krusty, thinking he would kiss it, but Krusty just shook hands in a normal way. Shiro met Akatsuki to ask about the investigation results. It was found that the nobles were still wary of them, but most of the nobles half disliked them and the other half wanted to attract them to their side. Suddenly, a magician named Regan approached them and took them to his private library.